Begin in KwaZulu-Natal, where more than 5 months after the deadly April floods, a group of displaced victims will be moved out of the community halls they were sheltered in. The government is providing new accommodation for a group of flood victims in Westville near Durban. The KwaZulu-Natal Premier will also update the public on recovery efforts thus far. This after various organizations criticized government's apparent slow response to the crisis. Newzroom Afrika's Karinda Jagmohan is covering the story. Where do we stand at this hour? Just how many people have been moved from these shelters, Karinda?
Well, at this stage, the KZN government is still in the first phase of moving people from community care centres to temporary residential units. The former KZN Premier, had about 2 months ago said that just over 1,000 temporary residential units were to be built. He actually said that at the Westville area, where the current group of displaced flood victims are going to be moved. There, they have been staying in that hall since the April floods, and like many other community halls, the group is staying under quite terrible conditions. There's overcrowding in some of these halls, there's a lack of privacy, there are security issues, and in many cases the residents are depending on private donors for assistance with food. There have been social workers coming through to assist the displaced flood victims, but when we went to the ground to speak to a number of people living at various community halls, they remained in the dark as to when they would actually be moved. This group is one of the first that we are seeing the KZN government move into the temporary residential units. There's also questions now about the state of the units itself. Like you mentioned, various organizations have criticized the response from the KZN government to the April floods, this including the South African Human Rights Commission, which has sent a report to Parliament. They've done an oversight visit here, and what they found, they said that the government's response to this crisis has been far too slow. They found issues with a lack of service delivery, particularly when it comes to the building of temporary residential units, the issuing of, or deployment rather, of water tankers. And similar sentiments were shared by the Auditor General, who also gave a report to Parliament very recently. She also criticized the government's response and went on to say that while the total budget for recovery and relief efforts were about 2 billion rand. By the end of July, only about 6% of this money had been spent, and that emergency measures for temporary residential units, water tankers, and the rebuilding of government buildings had not been fully completed by the end of July. So this is just some instances where there's been criticism to the government's response. Right now, we're going to see the first group of displaced people being moved into this often spoken about temporary residential units, and then the Premier will respond to this criticism of a slow response apparently by government and what she's doing next to help the province recover from that deadly disaster.
Karinda Jagmohan, thank you for that. We'll touch base with you a bit later on.